Let me wait for a few other participants. Yeah, fine. So let me start. You see that here. So this statement is trying to throw an exception. This statement is trying to throw an exception, right? So when an exception occur, a control jumps inside this cache block. A control jumps inside the cache block, and the code inside the cache block gets executed. What code I written? System.out.println inside cache. So therefore, here I'm getting output as inside cache. So once the code inside this cache block gets executed, the control moves to the next statement of the cache block. So my cache block begins here. My cache block begins here, and where it ends here, it ends here. And what's the next statement after my cache block? That is hello world. So therefore, in the output, I'm getting as hello world. You see that, students, here, even though I'm having an error, so this statement is an error. You see that this statement is an error, right? In the previous class, we have seen this statement is an error. So with the help of this try and catch block, what I have done, even though I have an error in my program, still my program has continued its execution. The program has not halted. You see that the program has not been terminated. In the previous class, as you notice that if I don't use this try and catch block, what's going to happen? The program has halted its execution. In other words, my program has terminated abruptly. But this can be avoided by using this try and catch blocks. Again, let me illustrate this. So now you see that the same block of code. Now let me remove this try block. Let me remove this try and catch. Yeah, you see that now I remove this try and catch block. Now let me run this program. You see that the program is terminated. It is throwing some error. You see that it is throwing some exception. Okay, so in order to resolve this, what we can do, we can place this code inside this try and catch block. Yes, I'm sorry. Okay. Block of code which you want to monitor for exception must be placed inside this try and catch block. You see that the same code I have not changed. What I have done, this block of code I placed inside my try block, and for this try block I have written a corresponding catch block. Now if I run this program, you see that the program will complete its execution. You see that the program is not terminating. You noticed the program is not terminating. In previous case, as you notice that the program has terminated, but in this case, you see that the program is not terminated. It's printing hello world. It's printing hello world, right? Even though you have an error, in your source code, but still you can continue its execution by placing this block of code, inside your try and catch block. Okay, for every try block, one more thing, for every try block, this is your try block. For every try block, it is mandated that you need to write the corresponding catch block. Okay, if you have a one try block, so if you have a try block, right? For every try block, it is mandated that you need to write a catch block. Why? Because inside the try block, see why? Because inside this try block, this statement is trying to throw an exception. Okay, so whenever an exception occurs, what we need to do? We need to catch. Whenever an exception occurs, what we need to do? We need to catch this exception. How we can catch this exception? In order to catch this exception, we need to write the corresponding catch block. Using this catch block, what we can do? We can catch the exception which is thrown out of this try block. Hope I've done with my discussion. Any questions, students? You can ask. Any questions? No questions. That's well and good. So let me put an animated here. Okay. Now let me ask a few questions with respect to this. Okay. Now which statement is throwing an exception? Can you answer, students? Let's try to answer these questions. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So let us begin with first question. Which statement is throwing an exception? Can anyone? In this block of code. Which statement is trying to throw an exception?
Int A is equal to 42 by D.
Very good. Your answer is correct. So there's a statement which throws an exception, right? That is int A equal to 42 divided by 3. And let us move to the next question. Who is throwing an exception? Who is throwing an exception? It is JVM. It is Java Virtual Machine. Okay, it's your JVM which is trying to throw your exception. Why? Because it is JVM is going to run this main method, right? When JVM is trying to run your main method, is going to encounter this statement. When it's trying to encounter this statement, it will be throwing an exception. It's going to throw an exception. So what exception is trying to throw? Is trying to throw an exception called arithmetic exception. It's going to throw an exception called arithmetic exception. Why arithmetic exception? Because here I'm trying to perform division operation, right? And that's what it is. And so JVM or Java runtime system, both are one and the same, right? Let us try to answer this third question. Where the exception is thrown? Where the exception is thrown, the exception, this is the statement. This is a statement which is trying to throw an exception. Where the statement is present, the statement is present inside your main method. The statement is present inside your main method. So therefore, where the exception is thrown, the exception is thrown inside my main method. The exception is thrown inside my main method, right? So that's what he says that. That's inside the main method. Now this question is answered. What type of exception is thrown, students? What type of exception is thrown?
Arithmetic exception.
Very good. It is going to throw an exception called arithmetic exception. It's trying to throw an exception called arithmetic exception. And it's all exceptions. All exceptions are subclass of exception. Okay, all exceptions. Arithmetic exception, or there are several exceptions are there. All exceptions are subclass of exception. In other words, this exception is a superclass. This exception is a superclass. And what is this arithmetic exception? It is my subclass. It is my subclass. It is I think both are written. This is my subclass. This is my subclass, and this is my superclass. I think I have discussed this, right? This is my superclass, and this is my subclass. And now this I'll discuss in detail. Yeah. Next. Yes, who is catching the exception? Who is catching the exception? Now, as you see that here, in this case, I have not written any try and catch block. Okay, I have not written any try and catch block. If you don't write any try and catch block by default, I think it's not writing. Yeah, by default, a default handler is going to catch your exception. By default, a default handler is going to catch your exception. In case you're not catching the exception, how to catch the exception? In order to catch the exception, what I should do? I need to write a catch block, right? In order to catch the exception, what I should do? I need to write a catch block. Let us assume I have not written a catch block. In case you don't write this catch block, by default, a default handler is going to catch your exception, right? That's what it says. That's what it says. So in the animation, it shows that. Let me show this animation. Yeah, the animation shows that. This statement, that is int equal 4 divided by 3, is trying to throw an arithmetic exception. This arithmetic exception is nothing but it's an object. Okay, arithmetic exception is nothing but it's an object. It's an object which is representing this exception, that is arithmetic exception, right? So this statement is trying to throw an exception, and this statement is dependent on the previous statement. So therefore, what I should do in order to handle this exception, these two statements I need to place inside my try block. Okay, I need to place inside my try block. So how to write this try block? So this you need to write your try block. So try is a keyword. That's very, very important. Try is a keyword. So it begins with opening flower brace and it ends with closing flower brace, right? As you see that these are the two statements, right? Let me change my color. Yeah. So this is my first statement and this is my second statement. So these are two statements which you need to place inside your try block. Okay. Okay. Why? Because this is the statement which might throw an arithmetic exception, right? So as I said that every try block must have a corresponding catch block, right? Why we should write a catch block? Because catch block is going to catch the exception, right? Yeah, let me see that. You see that? Every corresponding catch block. Catch. Let me and the animation. What is catch? Catch is a keyword. Catch is a keyword. So it begins with opening flower brace. Okay, catch block begins with opening flower brace and ends with closing flower brace. So between this opening flower brace and closing flower brace, any statements you want, you can write it. Okay. The most important here is you see that here I written exception as arithmetic exception. Why arithmetic exception? Because this statement is trying to throw an arithmetic exception. This arithmetic exception is nothing but it's an object. It's an object. Okay, and this object will be passed to this variable. This object will be passed to this variable. And what's the type of this variable? The type of this variable is nothing but it is arithmetic exception. Why the type of variable E is arithmetic exception? Because the type of object is arithmetic exception. I think you must know this. Let us assume I want to create an object of a class called A. I've created an object of a class called A. And this object I'm trying to store in a variable called E. And what's the type of E? The type of E is nothing but it is the name of the class. Here are the same thing. Here I'm trying to throw, you see that here I'm trying to create an arithmetic exception, which is an object. And this object I'm trying to assign to a variable called E. Now, what's the type of E? The type of E is nothing but it is arithmetic exception. So therefore, I picked here as arithmetic exception, right? That's very, very important. Now, one more thing here, why you have picked the name as E? Actually, this is a variable name. It can be any name of your choice, but generally they always pick E. Why? Because E stands for exception. E is a variable which stands for exception. So therefore, here we have picked a variable name as E, but it can be any name of your choice. Yeah, fine. Yeah. So that is exception type. It's a variable name. Yeah, that's what is an exception type. Okay, it's an exception type. Why? Because here I'm trying to throw an exception called arithmetic exception. That's very important. I hope you understood this slide. Yeah. Can you guess the output of this program, students? Can you guess the output of this program? That's the last slide. Can you guess the output of this program?
Divide by 0 and after catch statement.
Very good. The answer is 100% correct. You see the students here, I written int d equal to 0. And next what I'm trying to do, I'm trying to divide 42 by 0. Can I divide a number by 0? No, I can't divide a number by 0. Okay, what's going to happen? So this statement is going to generate an exception called arithmetic exception. So whenever an arithmetic exception is thrown, it'll go inside the catch statement. It goes inside the catch block. And inside the catch block, what's the first statement I written? I written system.out.println division by 0. So this statement will be executed. So therefore, I'll get division by 0. And next, what I said, after executing the statements inside the catch block, that is my catch block begins here, and where it ends here. After executing all the statements inside my catch block, where the control goes to the next statement after my catch block. And what's the next statement of my catch block? That is after catch statement, right? That's what it is. So you see that when I run this program, I'll get the following output. The most important thing you should observe here is, see, after XC, this statement is throwing an exception. When exceptions occur, the control jumps inside the catch block. Inside the catch block, I'm going to execute this statement. After executing this statement, it will never go back again. That's very, very important. It will never go back again. No, it will never go back. Okay. Once I come out of this try block, I'll never go back again. Okay. I repeat, once I come out of this try block, I'll go inside the catch block. Again, from catch block, I'll never move back to the try block. It is not. I can never move. Okay. Instead, what I'll be doing after executing all the statements inside my catch block, I'll be moving to the next statement after my catch block, that is system.out.println. So therefore, you see that I'm getting the following output, that is division by 0. I'm getting division by 0. Next, after catch statement, I'm getting after catch statement. And this statement, see that this statement, this will not be printed. It will never be printed. Never be printed. Right? I hope you understood this try and catch block, students. The most important thing you should observe is, I repeat, for every try block, it's very, very important. For every try block, they must have a corresponding catch block. That's very, very important. The first important observation, for every try block must have a corresponding catch block. When you write a try block, it's mandated that you need to write catch block. If you don't write, what's going to happen? If you don't write, it will throw an error. Let me illustrate this small example. You see that here. Okay. So now we are written a small code. So I said that for every try block must have a corresponding catch block. Now let me remove this catch block and let me try to run this program. You see that it throws an error. You see that? See what it is trying to throw? You can read it. Let me zoom it. 1 second. Let me zoom it. Zooming up. Browser is not zooming. Yeah. I think now you can see. See that? Now you see that error. Try without catch. You see that? Try without catch. You've written a try. You see that? I've written a try here. So I've written a try block. What is the corresponding catch block? You see that? I have not written. You see that? I've written a try block. But try block, what I written? There is no corresponding catch block. You see that? That's why I said when you write a try block, it's mandated that you need to write the corresponding catch block. So in order to resolve this error, what I should do? I need to write the corresponding catch block. So now if I run the program, you see that it doesn't throw any error. You see that there's no error. See, there's no error. Why now there's no error? I'm getting output because for try block, I've written the corresponding catch block. Okay, that's very important. And let us see that. Let me write here. System.out.println. Let me write inside try. Inside try. Same code. What's the output? See that? That's what you have seen. Okay. When I'm trying to run the program, I'll be executing this statement. But when I encounter this statement, what's going to happen? It's nothing but an error. It's an exception. It's an exception. Whenever exception occurs, what's going to happen? The control jumps inside my catch block. So inside my catch block, I'm going to execute this statement, that is inside catch. Okay. Next, after inside catch, where I'll be going? You see that after executing this, this statement throws an error. Okay. This statement throws an exception. When an exception occurs, I'll go inside my catch block. Inside my catch block, I'll be executing this statement. Executing this statement, I'll get output. Next, after executing this statement, I'll be reaching the end of my catch block. So once I reach end of my catch block, I'll be executing the next statement after my catch block. And what's the next statement? It is hello world. So in the output, I'll get inside catch and I'll get hello world. And this statement inside try will never be printed. Will never be printed. Okay. So any statements which you write. Okay. So whenever an exception occurs, very important. Whenever an exception occurs, the control immediately jumps inside the catch block. So any statements which you write after this, will never be executed. Any statement, any number of statements which you write after this line will never be executed. Right. So if I run this program, so let me run this program. Let me show the output of this. You see that the output I got. You see that the output I got inside catch. I got hello world. Right. That's what I got. See that. That's what I got. See that I got inside catch. I got hello world. But the statement has not been executed. The statement has not been executed. Why? Because the before statement is trying to throw an exception. It goes inside catch block. After executing, I'll be executing the next statement after my catch block. Yeah, that's all for today's class, students. You have any questions, you can answer. Right, so I'll put some PPTs. Just you can go to this animation. Yeah, you see that this statement is trying to throw an exception. Okay, it'll go here. And after executing this, see, the control will never go back. So once the control jumps inside the catch block, it will never go back again to the try block. Here, I'm going to see the control is jumping from try to catch block. Why the control is jumping from try to catch block? Because an exception occurred for this statement. So once I execute the code inside the catch block, the control will never go back again to the try block. Rather, it goes to the next statement after my catch block, that is after catch statement. So therefore, I'm getting the corresponding output division by 0 after catch statement. Yeah. Yes, students. Yeah, any questions you can ask. Raise them. That's all for today's class. Have a nice day. Now, one more thing, students, 1 second, please stay online. There are some of the statements I think written here. You can go to the statements. Yeah, just yeah, actually some statements has been written here. Just you can go to the statements. What is an exception? An exception is an object that describes an exceptional condition that occurs in a piece of code. I think that's what I've discussed, right? What is an exception? Exception is nothing but an object. So this statement throws an arithmetic exception. What is an arithmetic exception? It's nothing but it's an object. Okay, arithmetic exception is an object. Okay, so this object I'm passing to this variable called E. Sorry, it's an exception, nothing but it's an object that describes an exception. So this object describes an exception called arithmetic exception, and this object I'm going to pass this variable called E. Okay, that's what he's saying. So JVM creates an object representing the exception. Okay, and it's thrown in the method that caused the error. So this exception that is arithmetic exception is thrown out of this main method. From the main method, this exception has been thrown. Okay. So whenever an exception occurs, what we need to do, this exception needs to be handled. How we can handle an exception? In order to handle an exception, we need to use this try and catch block. So how to use this try and catch block? And just now we have illustrated this like this. You try to try block. So this, so try is a keyword. It begins, try block begins here. It ends here. So for every try block, we try the corresponding catch block. My catch block begins here and it ends here. It ends here. So in order to handle, whenever you want to handle any exception, you need to use this try and catch block. What's an exception? An exception, nothing but it's an object. It's an object. Yeah, fine. Fine, students. Any questions you can ask, and that's all for today's class. You can leave. If you have any questions, you can ask. Otherwise, you can leave, and that's all for today's class. Have a nice day. Any questions you can ask, students? Otherwise, you can leave the session. So any questions with exception handling? Yeah, you can feel free to ask any questions. If you have any questions, you can ask. Okay. Any questions you can ask. Any questions, students? Okay, fine. So that's all for today's class. Have a nice day.